The evening was thick with an unspoken tension as the first guests arrived at Blackwood Manor, a sprawling estate hidden behind wrought iron gates and veiled in mist. The invitations had been peculiar, thick parchment sealed with crimson wax, the handwriting precise yet unsettling. Each one bore the same message. You are cordially requested to attend a dinner of great importance at Blackwood Manor. The past demands an audience. Come alone. A. Graves. Detective Eleanor Hart had received hers by courier, though she had never met the elusive Alistair Graves. A man of wealth and mystery, Graves was known for his reclusive nature and his rumored involvement in scandals long buried. She had accepted out of professional curiosity, though the tone of the invitation suggested something darker than a social gathering. The other guests arrived one by one, each carrying their own secrets. There was Dr. Marcus Voyle, a physician with a too polite smile, Victoria Graves, the young and sharp-eyed niece of the host, Roland Langley, a lawyer whose gaze never quite met anyone else's, Samuel Kettering, a disgraced journalist with a grudge, and Helena Pierce, a former business partner with a cold, calculating demeanor. The manor's butler, an elderly man with hollow cheeks and a voice like dry leaves, greeted them at the door. "Mr. Graves will join you shortly," he said, though his tone suggested doubt. The guests exchanged uneasy glances as they were led into the grand hall, a cavernous room lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow every movement. Dinner was set in the dining room, an opulent space dominated by a long mahogany table. Crystal glasses gleamed under the chandelier's glow, but the seat at the head of the table remained conspicuously empty. "Where is our host?" Helena finally asked, her voice sharp with impatience. The butler hesitated. I cannot say. He has not been seen since this morning." A silence fell over the group. Detective Hart studied their faces, nervous twitches, forced smiles, fingers drumming against the tablecloth. Something was wrong. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, came a sound, a faint, distant thud, like a door closing too hard, or perhaps a body hitting the floor. The guests froze, and that was when the real mystery began. The sound, that unsettling thud from somewhere deeper in the house, hung in the air like a held breath. For a moment, no one moved. Then Dr. Voyle cleared his throat, his fingers tightening around his wine glass. "Probably just the old house settling," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Detective Hart was already on her feet. "We should check." The guests exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. The butler, his face ashen, led the way down a dimly lit hallway, lined with oil paintings that seemed to watch them pass. The air grew colder as they approached a heavy oak door at the end of the corridor, Graves's private study. The door was locked. From within, a faint metallic scent seeped through the crack beneath the door, iron and something sharper, something unmistakable. "Mr. Graves?" The butler knocked, his voice trembling. No answer. Langley, the lawyer, pushed forward. "Break it down." With a few heavy shoulder strikes from Kettering, the journalist, the door gave way with a splintering crack. The study beyond was a scene of eerie stillness. Books lined the walls, a dying fire crackled in the hearth, and at the grand mahogany desk, Alistair Graves sat slumped forward, his face frozen in a rictus of terror. Detective Hart moved first, pressing 2 fingers to Graves's neck. Cold. No pulse. His skin had already taken on the waxy pallor of death. The room itself was a puzzle. The windows were latched from the inside, the key still in the lock, meaning no one could have entered or exited after locking it. Yet Graves was undeniably dead, his body untouched by any visible wound. Then Hart noticed the half-written note beneath his hand, the ink smeared where his fingers had spasmed in their final moments. The truth about it read, the sentence left unfinished. Victoria, Graves's niece, let out a choked gasp. What could have done this? Hart's gaze swept the room. No signs of a struggle, no weapon, only the dagger missing from its display case on the wall, its empty mounting gleaming under the lamplight. And then, the most chilling detail of all, the door had been locked from the inside, which meant, in a room with no other exit, Graves should have been alone when he died. A heavy silence pressed upon the study as the guests stood frozen around Graves' lifeless form. The fire's embers cast flickering shadows across the walls, making the dead man's hollow eyes seem to shift in the dim light. Detective Hart exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. "Nobody leaves this room," she said, her voice low but commanding. "This is a crime scene now." The guests erupted in protests. Kettering, the journalist, demanded to call the police. Dr. Voyle insisted on examining the body, and Langley, the lawyer, muttered about legalities, but Hart cut through the noise with a single raised hand. "Until we know what happened here, every one of you is a suspect." The weight of her words settled over them. The Grand Manor, once a symbol of Graves's wealth and power, now felt like a gilded cage. Hart methodically began her examination, her trained eyes missing nothing. She noted the position of the body, collapsed forward onto the desk as if death had come suddenly. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture. The inkwell sat undisturbed, its dark contents gleaming under the lamplight. Then she saw it. A faint discoloration on Graves's right hand, the fingers slightly swollen where they had gripped the pen. "Poison," Hart murmured. Dr. Voyle stepped forward, adjusting his spectacles. That would explain the lack of wounds. Hart's gaze swept the room again. The key still sat in the lock, confirming the door had been secured from the inside. The windows were latched, their panes frosted with the night's chill. No hidden doors, no loose floorboards, at least none visible at a glance. Yet someone had murdered Graves in a room locked from within. The guests shifted uneasily under Hart's scrutiny. Victoria, the niece, clutched a handkerchief to her mouth, her eyes glistening. Langley cleared his throat. "We should notify the authorities. This is hardly the time for amateur sleuthing." Hart ignored him, her mind racing. Motives began taking shape. Graves's will, his business dealings, his shadowy past. Each person in this room stood to gain something from his death. The grandfather clock in the hallway groaned as its gears turned, marking the passage of time with a heavy, ominous tick. Detective Hart stood motionless in the center of the study, her eyes tracing the intricate patterns of the Persian rug beneath Graves's desk. Something nagged at her, a dissonance in the scene, like a single wrong note in an otherwise perfect chord. Then she saw it. Near the edge of the bookshelf, almost imperceptible against the dark wood, were two thin scratches marring the polished floor. They ran parallel, as if something heavy had been dragged, or perhaps slid, across them. Hart knelt, running her fingers over the grooves. The others watched in uneasy silence as she pressed against the side of the bookshelf. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the entire unit swung inward, revealing a narrow, shadow-cloaked passageway. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "Good God!" muttered Dr. Voyle, stepping back. "A secret door?" The passage beyond was cramped, lined with cobwebs and dust, clearly unused for years. But the layer of grime on the floor had been disturbed. Fresh footprints led into the darkness. Hart grabbed a candelabra from the desk and stepped into the passage, the flickering light casting monstrous shadows on the walls. The air smelled of damp stone and something faintly metallic. The others hesitated, then followed in a tense procession, their breaths shallow. The tunnel twisted sharply before ending at another door, this one unlocked. Hart pushed it open to reveal a small, disused servant's stairwell emerging near the kitchen. "So someone could have come and gone unseen," Kettering said, his voice tight with excitement. "This changes everything." Langley's face had gone pale. "This proves nothing. Anyone could have used this passage if they even knew it existed." Hart studied the lawyer's expression, the way his fingers clenched and unclenched at his sides. "But not everyone did know," she said quietly. "Did you, Mr. Langley?" Before he could answer, Victoria let out a sharp cry. She was staring at the base of the stairs, where a single object glinted in the candlelight, the missing Egyptian dagger, its blade dark with dried blood. Except Graves hadn't been stabbed. The implications settled over them like a shroud. The dagger was a decoy. The real weapon, the poison, had been far more subtle. But the hidden passage meant one undeniable truth. The locked room wasn't so locked after all, and the killer was still among them. The revelation of the hidden passage had left the group fractured. Eyes darted. Accusations simmered beneath tight-lipped silence. Detective Hart knelt beside Graves' desk once more, her attention now fixed on the inkwell. Its silver surface was tarnished with age, but the dark liquid inside seemed innocuous enough. Yet something about it nagged at her. She dipped the tip of a quill into the ink and let a single drop fall onto a blank sheet of paper. The stain spread, black as a starless night, but as it dried, an odd iridescent sheen shimmered across its surface, unnatural, almost sinister. "Dr. Voyle," Hart said without looking up, "you're familiar with poisons. What do you make of this?" The physician hesitated, then stepped forward, adjusting his spectacles. He sniffed the inkwell, recoiling slightly at the faint, acrid undertone beneath the usual metallic scent. "If I didn't know better, I'd say it's laced with aconite," he murmured. The symptoms fit: paralysis, rapid heart failure. A few drops on the skin would be enough to kill. A stunned silence followed. Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth. "But that means Uncle Alastair was poisoned when he wrote?" Hart nodded grimly. He dipped his pen, touched the poisoned ink to his fingers, and never finished his sentence. Langley scoffed. Preposterous. How could the killer guarantee he'd use that particular inkwell? What if he'd used a different pen, or hadn't written at all? Hart's gaze locked onto his. Unless the killer knew his habits, Graves was a creature of routine, wasn't he? She turned to the butler, who gave a shaky nod. He used this desk, this ink, every morning without fail. A chill settled over the room. The implication was clear. Only someone close to Graves would have known that. Then Kettering, the journalist, let out a sharp laugh. "So much for the locked room. The killer didn't need to be inside at all. They just needed to poison the ink ahead of time and walk away." Hart's fingers tightened around the inkwell. Not quite. The ink was fresh. If it had been poisoned days ago, it would have dried out. She paused, letting the truth sink in. This was done today. And then came the final damning detail. Hart lifted the inkwell to the light, revealing a single, faint fingerprint on its side, one that didn't match Graves's hands. Someone in this room had touched it. Someone who was still watching, still waiting. And they were running out of time to hide. The study had grown colder, the fire now reduced to embers that pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Detective Hart placed the inkwell carefully back on the desk, the single fingerprint glinting under the flickering gaslight. Every eye in the room followed her movement, tension coiling tighter with each passing second. Hart turned slowly, her gaze sweeping over each suspect in turn, the trembling niece, the sweating lawyer, the calculating doctor, the journalist with his too casual stance, the business partner whose nails dug into her palms. The silence was suffocating. Then, a crack. Langley's polished veneer shattered first. "This is absurd," he snapped, mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief. "You're suggesting one of us is a murderer based on some imagined mark on an inkwell." Hart didn't blink. "Not imagined. Your mark, Mr. Langley." A collective inhale. Langley froze, the handkerchief clutched in his fist. Hart stepped closer. "You were the last person to see Graves alive. The butler confirmed you met privately this morning. You knew his habits. You knew he'd use that inkwell." She pulled a folded document from her pocket, a letter, its seal broken. "And you knew he was about to expose your embezzlement from his company. This letter was meant for his solicitor." Langley's face drained of color. That's conjecture." But Hart wasn't finished. She lifted his right hand, forcing it into the light. A faint blue stain lingered on his index finger. "Aconite leaves traces. Did you scrub your hands raw after poisoning the ink? Or were you too busy staging the scene, locking the door from the inside, leaving the key to make it seem impossible?" The room erupted. Victoria gasped. Kettering lunged forward as if to grab Langley, but the lawyer was faster. With a snarl, he shoved the journalist aside and bolted, straight for the hidden passage. Hart gave chase, the others close behind. The narrow tunnel swallowed them, the walls pressing in like a throat. Langley's frantic footsteps echoed ahead, but he was cornered. The passage led only to the kitchen, where the staff stood frozen in shock. He wheeled around, wild-eyed, clutching the bloodied Egyptian dagger he'd snatched from the stairs. "Stay back!" he hissed, the blade glinting. Hart didn't flinch. "You won't use that. You're not a killer with a knife, you're a coward with poison." Langley's arm trembled. Then, with a choked sob, he dropped the dagger. It clattered against the stone floor, a useless, ugly thing. "He was going to ruin me," Langley whispered. And with those words, the last illusion of innocence shattered. The kitchen staff scattered as Langley stumbled backward, his back hitting the rough stone wall. His breath came in ragged gasps, eyes darting between the faces of the gathered crowd. Detective Hart's unrelenting stare, Victoria's tear-streaked fury, Kettering's triumphant sneer. The dagger lay between them, its dark blade a silent witness to his unraveling. "You don't understand," Langley choked out, his voice cracking. "He would have destroyed me, ruined my name, my career, everything." Hart took a slow step forward. "So you destroyed him first." Langley's hands clenched into fists. Then, in a burst of frantic energy, he lunged, not for the dagger, but for the kitchen door leading to the manor's rear gardens. He crashed through it, the night air swallowing him whole. Hart was already moving. "Kettering, with me!" she barked, sprinting after him. The journalist followed without hesitation, his reporter's instincts overriding any fear. The gardens were a maze of hedges and statues, the moon casting long, twisted shadows. Langley's silhouette flickered between the topiaries, his polished shoes slipping on dew-slick grass. He was heading for the old gatehouse, the one path off the estate that wouldn't be watched. Hart's pulse pounded in her ears, but her mind was cold, clear. She veered left, cutting through a rose arbor, while Kettering flanked right. Langley didn't see her until it was too late. She tackled him just as his fingers brushed the gate's rusted latch. They hit the ground hard, Langley's breath knocked out in a wheeze. He thrashed, but Kettering was there now, pinning his legs. "It's over," Hart growled, wrenching his arms behind his back. Langley went limp. His cheek pressed into the dirt. He let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "You don't know what he was," he whispered. "What he made me do." Hart didn't answer. In the distance, sirens wailed. The police, finally summoned by the butler. The flashing lights cut through the dark like a blade. As the officers hauled Langley to his feet, Hart caught a glimpse of his face in the red and blue glare. Not defiance, not even fear. Just emptiness. The kind that came after the last secret had been told. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.